What's up, guys? In this video, we're going to be breaking down what can be one of the more stressful moments in a financed real estate transaction. What happens when the appraisal comes in low? And stick around to the end because we're going to talk about how to prevent this from happening in the first place, whether you're a buyer or a seller. First, let's start off with what the buyer's options are and how they can handle a low appraisal. Number one, you can actually renegotiate the purchase price with the seller. Now, not all sellers are going to actually be open to this, but it doesn't hurt to have this as a first option to potentially see if that seller is going to accept a reduced offer price for that property because the appraisal came in low. There's no telling the next appraisal's not going to come in just as low. So start here first if you're a buyer. The second option for a low appraisal, if you're a buyer, is to come up with the additional funds out of pocket. That lender's only going to finance a certain amount based on the appraised value of the property. So if an appraisal comes in low and you still want to move forward with the transaction and you find out the seller's not going to accept any other terms or renegotiations, then you can come up with that money out of pocket and keep the transaction moving forward. The third option you have as a buyer is somewhere in between 1 and 2, where you're actually bringing more cash to the table as a buyer, but asking the seller to come down a little bit in price. So meeting somewhere in the middle and renegotiating it that way. This is a very common way that this is handled in practice and something that I see all the time when low appraisals do happen. Option number 4 for buyers is basically a reconsideration of value, or ROV. And this is a way that you can basically provide a little bit more information to the lender or the appraiser through the lender and give them maybe some additional comps or some additional information that you feel like wasn't taken into consideration before, to have them revisit what the appraised value is and possibly boost that value up to the offer price. Your fifth option as a buyer is basically to order a second appraisal. Oftentimes you can do this through that same original lender that you're using, and they'll just send another appraiser in their rotation by the property, especially if you feel that original appraisal was way off and they're not going to make any adjustments to boost that valuation up. A second appraiser or second opinion of value is a great option to have. And oftentimes I see people switching lenders at this point. So whether that original lender doesn't allow this to happen, or they feel like they are going to want to use a more local lender if they're bringing someone in from out of state, and those local lenders are going to have better relationships with their sort of group of appraisers, and those appraisers are going to have a stronger sense of what's going on in the current market in that location. And we'll get into this a little bit more in the sort of preventative measures in a few minutes, but this is a great way to still move forward with the transaction and not necessarily have to come out of pocket to cover that gap between the offer price and the appraised value. Your sixth option as a buyer, if you run into a low appraisal, is to actually leverage those contingencies that we built into the original offer and walk away from the transaction. If you're not coming to common ground or able to renegotiate to purchase price point or offer terms that are working for you and the seller of the property, you can always leverage those contingencies and walk away, move on to the next property. But obviously, make sure you're working with a buyer's agent that has half a brain, is going to make sure your deposits are protected through these contingencies. And in Massachusetts specifically, we work with real estate attorneys who also make sure that our buyers are protected through the purchase and sale agreement and the terms within that document. And you always have that option to walk away and move on to a property that's going to be a better fit for you and your comfort level at that price point. Now let's get into what the seller's options are when they run into a low appraisal and what they can do about it. And some of this stuff is going to pretty closely mirror what happened on the buy side, but it's just going to be from the seller's perspective. So I'll run through these quickly and we'll get into how to prevent this stuff from ever happening to begin with. Your first option as a seller running into a low appraisal is to just drop the purchase price to that appraised amount. Now you might think, as a potential home seller, there's no way you would ever do this. And at the end of the day, it's up to each individual seller how they want to handle a low appraisal. But just know that, there are some people out there, maybe it's their 6th month on the market. Maybe they weren't really positioned that well. This happens quite a bit. If that appraisal comes in low, then and they don't see any competing offers, or they're just ready to sell the property and they're okay, they think that's a fair price at this point in time, then they have that option to just drop the purchase price to what the appraised value is. Number two, obviously the flip side of that is you can actually request that the buyer cover the entire gap between the appraised value and the original offer price, and they have to bring cash to the table if they're not able to finance it through their mortgage, through their lender. So if it's a more competitive situation, maybe it's the first week on the market, you can definitely ask them to do this and just make sure that you're okay with them saying, we don't have that cash in our pockets, we're going to walk away. But this is another option, is to have the buyer actually cover that entire gap between the appraised value and the purchase price on that original offer. Your third option, as I covered above, is negotiate a split, meet somewhere in the middle of 1 and 2, find a happy medium, and move on through the transaction knowing that you guys are both going to be happy with the end result and you both just want to get to the closing table. Your fourth option as a seller is basically to get some additional information into the hands of the appraiser through your real estate agent. Have them make sure they're providing those comparable properties, make sure they have a list of the recent renovations, upgrades, receipts from contractors, every piece of information possible to prove that your property is worth more than the appraised value came back at. Your fifth option as a seller in this situation is basically to ask the buyers to do another appraisal. Either have their appraisal change their opinion of the value, do a reconsideration of value, or have them send another appraiser out. If we have the information that we need to support the property's worth more than the appraised value came back at, or the valuation came back at, then we want them to do everything they can to get the funding that they need to move forward with this purchase without it costing the seller any additional money. Your sixth option as a seller running into a low appraisal is if you cannot find some kind of a middle ground with those buyers and you cannot make this work and you're confident that you're going to get your number, go back on the market. Depends on what your time frame is, what your goals are, how well you feel the property was marketed, how well you were positioned, what the current market's doing. Maybe 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks has passed since that original offer was actually made. So there's a lot of variables here. I would definitely have a conversation with your real estate agent or hire a new real estate agent if that original one did a terrible job. But you want to sort of have a backup plan here. If you're going to go back on the market, if you couldn't meet in the middle with the buyer, you want to know for sure that you're just not going to run into this problem with the next buyer that comes through. How do you know the next appraiser is not going to value the property the same way the original one did, potentially wasting even more of your time? So it's definitely a conversation you want to have with your real estate agent and make sure you're making the decisions that's going to work best for you. So considering a low appraisal is not good for buyers, it's not good for sellers. No one feels like they won when it comes to a low appraisal. Everyone feels like the transaction didn't go their way, and the real estate agents are on either side trying to set expectations. But really our job is to prevent this from happening to begin with. So how do we do that? For buyers out there, the best way to prevent a low appraisal is to work with a local lender who works with local appraisers. I cannot say enough about this. In the New England area, in the greater Boston area, there is so much nuance to these different types, these different styles of properties. It's all over the map. There's different years that these properties were built. It's not just these large swaths of identical properties where hundreds of them are finished and sold off all at the same time. And it's super easy for these appraisers to just go boom, boom, boom. This property is worth that. There's just so much nuance. So it's important that these local lenders are using these local appraisers that understand a lot of this nuance. Recently, I was dealing with a couple that was moving back into the Massachusetts area from California. They happened to already have a relationship with a bank, so they already chose what loan officer they were going to use to finance their transaction. I helped them find a great property in Hingham, and they went up against another buyer. They ended up winning out in the bidding process and got their offer accepted. Got time to do the appraisal. The appraisal ended up coming back $100,000 lower than the offer price, despite there being a nearly identical offer that they went up against. So You never really know what you're going to get if you're just using one of those big banks, and the lenders don't necessarily have a library of appraisers that they're using in the area. So they chose to use the option to not only have a second appraiser go by, but also get a second lender involved. So they switched away from the bank or the lender that they were using, and we provided one of our lenders that a lot of our buyers have loved to use, and they immediately had an appraiser over there. The appraisal came in just fine, and we were on to the next portion of the transaction. So it was as simple as that. We got a second opinion. We looped in a lender that has rescued a lot of my clients' deals, and we got the deal done that way for them. So it's just super important that you're working with a local lender that understands to use local appraisers that understand a lot of this nuance. The second thing that you can do as a home buyer to prevent a low appraisal is to actually just review the comparable properties out there with your real estate agent. So take a look at some of those other homes that have changed hands in the last 3 months, the last 6 months, and make sure you're looking at the same properties that an appraiser is likely to look at to make sure it makes sense to offer the price you're about to offer for this home. Number 3 is less of a preventative measure for buyers and more of a tip about how to get ahead of other buyers in the market. So if you're actually willing to risk a little bit more, and you know that other buyers are out there and they're scared of a low appraisal happening, or you know that they might not have the cash on hand to cover an appraisal gap, you can actually include that appraisal gap language in your offer. You can say, hey, if this appraisal comes in low, we're willing to cover a gap of this amount. And that can make your offer stand out above and beyond all of those other offers that are on the table. So if this is going to be your 30-year home, if you know you're going to raise your family here, if you have to have this property, using some appraisal gap language in your offer can be a great way to win in a competitive bidding situation. For sellers, one of the best things that you can do to avoid a low appraisal is to position the property accordingly. So I just had a great conversation with a local appraiser, Daniel Collins. I'll drop that video link in here. But he mentioned in that video you want to just see the property objectively if you can. I know it's difficult to do for a lot of sellers, but if you are well positioned, you're positioning the home with the market, you're realistic about what these types of homes are trading for, it is very much in your interest to position it that way. Whereas, it's your listing agent's job to get the property in front of as many eyeballs as possible. What the positioning price point does is get those eyeballs to turn into people coming in the door of that property, creating a bidding situation, and potentially getting you some, not just higher purchase prices, but creating an environment where you're more likely to get some of that appraisal language I was just talking about, where people are saying, look, not only am I willing to pay this amount for the home, but if an appraisal comes in low, I will cover whatever that appraisal gap is up to this amount that I'm willing to purchase it for. So it's really a matter of positioning to create an environment that allows the marketing basically to be turbocharged and create this environment where that can happen. So that is the first way to prevent a low appraisal, is to just position the property accordingly. The second thing you can do as a home seller, and this is something that you can lean on your real estate agent to do, is basically to provide sort of a value packet to the appraiser. So usually the listing agent is the one that meets the appraiser at the property, lets them into the property, and it's at that point where they can provide basically some additional information for the appraiser to use. So some of those comps that the listing agent ran to actually position the property to begin with, they can print out all the information about those properties, hand it off to the appraiser alongside any renovation information that they have from the seller, any receipts, any construction work, any contracting work that they've had done. They can hand them basically a packet of information showing them that this home is valuable based on all of these resources. The third thing that you can do as a home seller to make sure you're not going to run into a low appraisal is basically to show the property in the best possible light, the best possible condition. So this is not just going to help with the marketability of the property, but it's also going to help when it comes to appraisal time. So Not just making sure the property's clean, but, you know, doing things like painting, washing windows, doing the landscaping, curb appeal, making sure the grass is cut, make sure there's no safety hazards, swap out or upgrade some of those older light fixtures, some of the old cabinet hardware. These minor things can go a long way in making the property appear to be well maintained and more up to date, more modern, more what current buyers are looking for. So these things are not just going to help with the photography and the marketability, but also help the appraiser value the property higher. The fourth and final point I'm going to discuss as far as sellers avoiding a low appraisal is to just be cautious about accepting offers that are too high. A lot of sellers see a high offer, or a lot of inexperienced or uneducated sellers and even listing agents will see a high offer, get all excited and be like, well, we have to accept this one. It's got the highest number on it, when the other offer terms don't actually support that offer price, or their contingencies protect them from actually paying that price if an appraisal comes in low. So I ran into this not too long ago. Someone offered a crazy amount over what the property was listed for, above and beyond what anyone else was offering, but the appraisal language wasn't there. So I was like, look, if we accept this offer, it's going to have to say we're going to cover any appraisal gap, because I didn't have any data that was supporting their offer price. I only had data to support comparables that were, you know, even $100,000 lower than this. So if we were going to start this transaction and get 4 weeks, 5 weeks down the road and find out that there was a lower appraisal, that puts my seller in a spot where they have to choose whether to go back on the market or to move forward and reduce the purchase price to the appraised value. So I have to protect my sellers. I let them know that ahead of time. We got this crazy offer, but there is nothing telling me that they're going to actually have to pay this, or they're not going to renegotiate down the road. So just look out for those offers that have a crazy purchase price on them if they have no appraisal language in there to back it up. So as a conclusion here, a low appraisal isn't the end of the world. This does happen pretty regularly, and oftentimes there's just a simple negotiation and things move forward. But it can be a major speed bump in a transaction, especially if there's some ego involved or expectations haven't been set properly. So it can absolutely blow up a transaction, cost a lot of people a lot of time. So just do everything that you can ahead of time to take the proper steps to actually prevent this from happening. Make sure you're working with the right agents out there. So if you're looking for a property in the greater Boston area and you want to avoid a low appraisal, or if you're looking to sell a property in the greater Boston area and trying to avoid running into problems like this, feel free to reach out to me and our team, Mike Rivers, the Rivers Group at Compass. But whether you're buying, selling, renting your property out as a landlord, looking to get your hands on a rental, we can help you there. So love to hear from you guys. We love helping people out that are following our channel, and hopefully you guys got a lot out of this video. If you have anything to add or any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. And thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one. Take care.